Get on the ground now. Flashlights, combat boots, shouting. My wife opened the front door barefoot, holding her coffee. They didn't ask, they didn't check. They tased her right there on our lawn in front of me, in front of our neighbors, like we were nothing. And I just stood still until I said 5 words and the entire tactical unit froze. If this hits you hard, comment unacceptable. The morning had started like any other in the Cole household. Birds chirping, sprinklers hissing across lawns, the quiet rhythm of suburban life unfolding as the first light broke over Maple Street. Rick Cole, 62, had risen at 0500 hours a habit from 30 years of military service that retirement couldn't break. The retired Army colonel moved through his pre-dawn routine with practiced efficiency, stretching exercises, coffee brewing. Newspaper retrieved from the driveway. By 0615, he was already outside picking up trash bins knocked over by last night's wind straightening his neighbor's fallen mailbox. At 0630, he filled the bird feeders that dotted his modest front yard, a yard meticulous in its simplicity, with trimmed hedges and a flagpole displaying the stars and stripes. Rick was known throughout the neighborhood as the guy who helps with everything. When Mrs. Patterson's late husband died last winter, Rick cleared her driveway after every snowfall without being asked. When the Henderson boy needed help with his Eagle Scout project, Rick provided tools and guidance. Always respectful, always steady, a quiet authority that required no announcement. The front door opened and Mary Ann stepped onto the porch barefoot in her blue robe, silver hair catching the morning light. After 40 years of marriage, she still smiled at him like he was a young captain coming home on leave. Same old sunrise, she said, extending a steaming mug toward him. Fresh brew. Their home wasn't grand, a modest 2-story with weathered brick and carefully maintained shutters. A simple sticker in the front window read, "Veteran lives here." A small display case visible through the living room window held folded flags and shadow boxes of medals rarely discussed. Then the sudden growl of engines. 3 black SUVs rounded the corner at speed tires, grabbing asphalt with urgent purpose. They screeched to a halt, boxing in the Coles driveway. Before the engines died, doors flew open. Men in tactical gear poured out bulletproof vests, helmets, weapons raised. Federal warrant down on the ground. Rick raised his hands immediately, coffee mug still clutched in his right. 30 years of command told him when compliance saved lives. "What's this about?" he asked, voice steady. Mary Ann stepped forward on the porch. "Rick." A red laser dot appeared on her chest. One officer shouted, "Drop the object." She held only her ceramic mug. Without warning, click, a sharp pop. 2 barbed probes struck her chest. Electricity arced. She crumpled onto the front lawn, body contorting, coffee shattering beside her. Rick didn't move. Not yet. He looked at his wife, her breathing shallow, her robe tangled around her legs. His jaw clenched tight, the only visible sign of the storm brewing within him. Across the street, blinds opened. Neighbors emerged. Phones appeared, recording the scene unfolding in horrified silence. "Secure the perimeter," one officer yelled. Another shoved Rick onto his knees with unnecessary force. "Do you understand you're interfering with a federal operation?" Rick didn't answer. He just stared at the steam rising from the broken mug, mixing with the morning dew on his perfectly maintained lawn. No one offered aid, no one apologized. Rick remained kneeling in the wet grass, hands behind his head. 2 agents flanked him, fingers hovering near triggers. The tactical team commander barked orders as others formed a perimeter around the property, pushing back gathering neighbors. "Suspect is not visible. Entry team clearing interior," crackled a radio. Rick spoke, voice calm despite the circumstances. "That's my wife. She has a pacemaker." No response came, no medical attention offered. Mary Ann lay motionless on the lawn, occasional tremors still running through her limbs, the taser barbs embedded in her skin. A young officer with sergeant stripes scoffed, "We've got authority. Stay quiet." Through the open front door, Rick could see the entry team tearing through his home. The sound of drawers emptying, furniture being moved, then a crash. The glass case in the foyer toppled, medals and commendations spilling across the hardwood floor. Inside, a silver star, a bronze star with Valor device, 3 purple hearts, a folded flag now partially unfurled across the entryway tile. "Fake display," one agent called out, kicking the bronze star aside with his boot. Another snickered loud enough to carry. Old man thinks he's still running the command post. Rick didn't react, but something shifted in his demeanor. His breathing slowed, became more deliberate. His spine straightened despite being forced into a kneeling position. The colonel was emerging through the retired civilian. Marianne remained unattended. Her bare feet had begun to turn blue against the cold morning grass. Her silver hair splayed out around her head like a halo. Mrs. Patterson, 78 years old and barely 5 feet tall, shouted from her adjacent porch, "She needs help. Can't you see she needs medical attention?" One officer turned hand on holster. "Get inside, ma'am. This is a federal operation." Still no EMTs had arrived. No medical assessment made. 15 minutes had passed since the taser deployment. The perimeter officer's radio crackled. He frowned, then approached the tactical commander. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing repeatedly at Rick. "This guy's not on the suspect list," the perimeter officer finally said loud enough for Rick to hear. "Address confirmation is coming up negative." Still, no one called off the operation. No one helped Marianne. The entry team continued to ransack the house, breaking what couldn't be quickly searched. Rick looked up at the tactical commander. His voice, when it finally came, was low and steady, the voice that had directed men in combat, that had called in airstrikes, that had ordered last stands. "You're about to make a second mistake." The commander stalked over, towering above the kneeling man. "Is that a threat, sir?" Rick met his gaze without blinking. Years of authority resonated in the 5 simple words he spoke next. "Check your chain of command." Silence. The commander's radio crackled to life. "Sierra Leader, this is Control. Abort mission. Wrong house confirmed. I repeat, wrong house." Every agent froze. The commander's face drained of color as he stared down at the kneeling man, the man whose identity was suddenly becoming horrifyingly clear. Reading this makes my blood boil. A decorated veteran. "Treated like this, if you believe this is unfair, type that word below. Let's make it heard." The tactical team stood paralyzed. Uncertainty rippled through their ranks as training and protocol suddenly collided with the dawning realization of catastrophic error. "Wait, who is this guy?" one agent whispered to another. Rick rose slowly from his knees, ignoring the hands that had previously restrained him. Without seeking permission, he walked past the commander through his own front door and into the foyer. He stepped carefully around his scattered medals and the trampled flag, disappearing briefly into his study. When he returned, he carried a small black case worn at the edges from years of handling. The team watched in uneasy silence as he opened it. Inside, a Department of Defense credential, expired but immediately recognizable by its distinctive markings and security features. Beneath it lay a challenge coin, not the ordinary variety exchanged among service members, but the rare Pentagon Command Tier coin given only to those who had directed operations at the highest levels. "Colonel Richard Cole, retired," he stated, voice now carrying the full weight of his former rank, "and you just tased my wife without verifying target ID, entering my home without proper authorization, and destroying property, including awarded medals of valor." The perimeter officer lowered his weapon completely. "Sir, we weren't told of any DoD presence in this district." "That's because I'm retired," Rick replied evenly. "And this is my home, not a target house, not a staging area. My home where my wife should feel safe." By now, paramedics had finally arrived, attending to Marianne. Rick watched them work for a moment, then turned back to the assembled team. "You entered my home without verification. You assaulted my wife without provocation. You ignored warning signs that should have triggered protocol review." His voice remained measured but carried across the entire yard. "And now the chain of command will deal with each of you accordingly." A young lieutenant lowered his weapon, face pale. "Sir, I didn't know." Rick looked him directly in the eye. "You will." The tactical commander attempted to salvage the situation. "Colonel, I understand your frustration, but we were acting on intelligence." Rick raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Dismissed." Just one word, but delivered with such natural authority that the entire team instinctively took a step back. Within minutes, the street filled with different vehicles, ambulances, police, and one unmarked car that pulled up silently. A man in a dark suit emerged, badge discreetly displayed. "Colonel Cole," he nodded respectfully. "Washington has been notified." Rick barely acknowledged him, his attention focused on the ambulance where paramedics prepared to transport Marianne. Tell them it's done, but make sure this doesn't happen to another family. By afternoon, video clips from neighbors' phones had begun circulating online. Headlines emerged: veteran's wife tased in botched raid. Federal tactical error leads to civilian injury. News vans gathered at the perimeter of the property, but no interviews were granted. As evening fell, Rick sat quietly beside Marianne's hospital bed holding her hand. Her heartbeat had stabilized the pacemaker, fortunately undamaged by the taser. "You didn't have to be so stoic," she whispered, a weak smile crossing her face. "Old habits," he replied gently, brushing hair from her forehead. "Did you use your colonel voice on them?" He shook his head slightly. "Didn't need to. Truth has its own authority." She squeezed his hand. "You're safe now. That's what matters." "No," he corrected gently. "We're safe. That's what's always mattered." A week later, Rick returned to his front lawn. Spring rain had washed away most evidence of the incident, but a small burnt patch remained where the taser had discharged into the earth after striking Marianne. He never mowed that spot again, leaving it as an unspoken memorial. Neighbors came without announcement or fanfare. Some brought casseroles and baked goods, setting them silently on the porch. Others simply stood in their own yards, offering nods of solidarity across driveways and fences. One morning, a young soldier in full-dress uniform walked up the driveway. Without a word, he faced the house and rendered a perfect salute before turning and walking away. Days later, others followed. Veterans from across 3 counties, cadets from the nearby academy, even children from the neighborhood, solemn and wide-eyed, bringing hand-drawn cards for Mrs. Cole. Someone Rick never discovered who taped a small, laminated sign to his mailbox: "Check your chain of command." But it became a quiet rallying cry, a reminder that authority requires responsibility. Rick never raised his voice about the incident, never pursued vengeance or sought media attention. He simply stood beside his wife through her recovery and never let go. When asked later by a persistent reporter why he didn't demand more justice, his answer was simple: true authority doesn't need to shout, it whispers. Subscribe to Wounds and Honor if you believe true authority doesn't come from shouting, it comes from legacy.